You had a chance to sit down with the voice of the Sixers, Tom McGinnis, to talk the end of the season, the playoff possibilities, and where they've been. So tell us what's going on.
Well, like me, he's pretty excited about the postseason prospects of the Sixers. He, calls their games every single night. So here is our chat from just a few hours ago, Bill. And let me do it again. Get excited, Sixers fans. Great to talk to this guy once again on Philly Pressbox Radio. It's been way too long. You know him as the radio voice of the 76ers, Tom McGinnis. Hey, Tom, how are you?
All right, Chet, thanks for having me.
Tom, another big win for the 76ers last night. That is 6 straight. It seems like they're getting hot just at the right time with the playoffs underway next week, right?
Well, for sure. And obviously getting Embiid back. And for that matter, really getting almost completely healthy. The only guy that's out right now is Robert Covington. In that they got DeAnthony Melton back in the lineup last night. He looked pretty good. So, yeah, for sure. It's been a good run. It was a difficult 2 months without Joel, and now that he's back and getting into game shape and everybody's getting used to playing with him again, it's a good time. For the Sixers, obviously in the nick of time, you'd always like to have more time, but it would be really big if they could avoid the play-in and have even more time. By that I mean next week, being able to practice and rest and get ready for round one.
Yeah, getting Embiid back is huge, of course. We know how talented he is, but are you surprised at the fact that he seems to be in pretty good shape already after 2 months off, and the fact that he's fitting in also with a few guys that he had never played with before?
Well, not at, the in shape part, because he's been rehabbing for this entire time. I'm sure he had to stay off his knee at the beginning of after his procedure. But obviously it means a lot, he's definitely trying to take this team where it hasn't gone before. They've been over 500 for the last 7 years and been in the playoffs. But, if you have championship aspirations, you got to go farther than the second round, obviously. So, no, and the other guys, it's been built, in terms of to have spacing and shooting around Joel. And that's what they've done, and it does take a little time for chemistry. I think even last night, for instance, Cameron Payne started and Maxey and Lowry didn't. And I don't know that Payne had been in a lot of those actions early in the game. You kind of noticed there was, they needed to get together a little bit more. So everybody's adjusting for sure, because he's the center of the offensive universe. But that's what creates opportunities, right? Two people guard him and somebody's open, and you got to find open shooters. And then obviously you got to knock down shots to make it all pay off.
Kelly Oubre Jr. has really picked it up recently. We know what Embiid and Tyrese Maxey can bring to the table every night, but can Oubre keep this up into the postseason?
For sure. He's had a great year. He started off great, got injured, had a bit of a dip, took him a little bit while, but he's come back and he's been a terrific player for sure. He's got an explosive first step. As Coach Nurse has said, nobody can really stop him from getting in front of him. And for Kelly Oubre, it's how he finishes and reading those actions right at the basket, whether he passes it, scores it, drives it. But, he's been a terrific player, very aggressive, made some clutch threes last week in the win in Miami, had some big-time plays down the stretch with Tyrese to help the Sixers beat the Heat. But he would certainly be an X factor. I think somebody was asking me last night, I think Matt Murphy on the postgame for the radio, and who is an X factor? I think it's Oubre, but it's always Tobias Harris. You get 16, 18, 20 points from Tobias Harris in these playoff games, with everything else being even, and that could be a real key for the Sixers, provided Maxey and Embiid give you what you'd expect from two All-Stars.
Well, we need to talk about Tyrese Maxey. He just keeps getting better and better and better. How much more upside do you think he has?
I think he's got a lot. I believe he's only 23 years old, and he's never been in this position before where he's been the point guard. This is the first year, and he's an insatiable worker. And with that athletic ability and the character and everything that he brings to the table, and as everybody's seen, with the speed and then the ability to, create off the dribble, that sweeping step back, move where he ends up shooting the long threes. He's creating 4 or 5 feet of space, which is, I don't know that, we've seen Curry do that to a little extent, but he's not as fast as Maxey. So he's got players get better. You put in the work like he does, players develop and get better. He's seen so much over this last year. That's going to really help his learning curve. And by that, I mean all the defenses have thrown at him, because all of a sudden he became the top, thing that defenses had to scheme against from terms of opponents. So, he's got the heart of a champion. That game the other night in San Antonio, he proved that was amazing, to have 52 points and have had 3 games with 50 or more. Like, the sky's the limit. He's got a lot more to give, I think.
I know you're a Nick Nurse fan, Tom. I don't know if you're willing to say it, but I will. He's a better coach than Doc Rivers. Your thoughts?
Well, I was a big fan of Doc Rivers. I get close to these guys. I'm with them a lot, and it turns out by default, I've studied coaches all my career. And I just finished a book on Lute Olson. I do. I love biographies. I read everything, all kinds of books, but I definitely read basketball books. And I am a big fan, like watching him from afar over the years. He was such a good coach for Toronto against the Sixers, and he's got it all. There's so much attention to detail. When you're an NBA head coach, you're running a huge machine with all the staff. You're the leader. You're on the road. You're the leader, and he's the leader of the program. I get it that Daryl runs the entire organization, Daryl Morey, along with Elton Brand. But like coach, he works with the medical people. But I mean, like running the staff, running the team, and he's got everything. He has like soup to nuts in terms of X's and O's. He's seen so much. There's a lot of skill sets that that a coach has to have in terms of getting the players to play hard. Like people say guys don't need to be motivated. Yes, they do. Like, I get it, they're pro players, but yes, they do. They're people. And he's a tactician. He's like a basketball savant. He's been brilliant.
How much fun would it be to see the Sixers play the Bucks in the postseason?
Well, like the way Milwaukee, they had a big win last night over Orlando, but, looks like Giannis might be out for a week at least with this calf injury. And it's that old drill. Like, you can't really project who you want to play, because that almost never comes true. And that's certainly with the possibility of a play-in, it's hard to say. But would you rather play Milwaukee or Boston? I think everybody would pick Milwaukee right now. And the whole Doc Rivers part of it is just, that's part of it, but that's not. So, Milwaukee's teetered a little bit down the stretch here. I think that more than anything would be the reason you'd want to play the Bucks. And the Sixers, if they play at the apex of their game, I think they can beat Milwaukee. And I'm not saying they can't beat Boston, because eventually if you're going to get to where you want to go, you're more than likely going to have to play Boston. But first things first, and getting in. And, just like any other coach would say, at this point, you want to be healthy and good spirit and organized and playing the best that you can play. And if you're that, and, if you're the Sixers, you consider how they started the season. They had, one of the best records. They beat Boston, you'll take it. You'll take it, whether it's Milwaukee or whomever it turns out to be. But I think what would be really good is, and Coach Nurse intimated this a little bit last night, speaking of like DeAnthony Melton, but I think you could say that about the greater whole. Not that you get to practice a lot in the playoffs, but you definitely get to go. And the more, if you get a playoff run, now you're talking weeks of being together where, you can make some adjustments and you can work on things the whole time. And your team is going to get better as a result. And it would give the group more time to be together the longer they're able to stay alive in the playoffs.
Well, as I show the standings, the Sixers right now are in the 7th spot, but they could get up to 5th or 6th. They could fall to 8th. Beating Orlando Friday night, of course, would be huge. So how do you see this playing out? Does it matter? I know if you're in the play-in, you'd much rather be in the 7th spot than the 8th spot, because you got the home game, right?
For sure. I mean, the way things are right now, let's just say the Sixers went up, but everybody else takes care of business. That's kind of how you have to presume it to happen. There was definitely some scoreboard watching last night. When we left the arena, all of a sudden that Miami-Atlanta game goes to overtime. And you're like, oh. and it turned out to be a double overtime game, and Miami still won. So that was interesting. But if the Sixers, you definitely want a home game, but it's the danger zone. Like the Sixers, you knew eventually the Sixers would be in this scenario. You just didn't know it would be this year, and they're obviously in this position because Joel Embiid got hurt for 29 games and was out. But it's a scary proposition. What if somebody turns their ankle, or what if somebody from the opponent makes 8 threes, or you never know, where it's from the 7th or 8th spot it's actually 2 games, but still that's a wild scenario. And then if you happen to lose the first game and play whatever it is, Chicago or Atlanta, and the prize is you beat Boston in the first round. So that right there is kind of why you'd want to, avoid it. It's fairly obvious. And the Sixers have played well against Orlando, and they've played well against Cleveland. Indiana, they beat them, and then they lost to them in the in-season tournament, and lost to them once out there. But again, I think if the Sixers are healthy and whole and playing well, then it's a whole different ballgame. Then it goes back to sort of how it was earlier in the season. And they've got a lot of experience. When you look at Lowry and Batum and Tobias and Joel, and Maxey's been through it now. This would be his 4th playoff. So, and then Nurse and everybody we've talked about. Melton's got experience, and on like that. So, like the Orlando game is huge, but you got to win them all. Like the Sixers have to finish on an 8-game winning streak and see what happens.
Yeah, one challenge for Nick Nurse will be the rotation. With DeAnthony Melton back, as you said, Harris missed a few games. He's back. Maxey and Embiid should both be very healthy going in. How's he going to juggle the rotation? Because normally you only play 8 or 9 guys. He's got
right.
a deep bench right now.
No doubt, good problem to have, right? You saw Buddy Hield find the stroke a little bit last night, making 4 threes. But one thing I've noticed, when you go to that game in San Antonio, like Nick Nurse, he will go with what he thinks is going to be beneficial. You know what I mean? Whether it's sitting somebody and bringing in Ricky Council the 4th or KJ Martin, those guys will probably in the playoffs be more situational. Martin brings you, a variety defensively. But you definitely tighten up your rotations a little bit because it's every other day. You're not playing back-to-backs. You're able to play, rest, recover, adjust, and play again. But that's, it's a benefit to having Cameron Payne, having, Batum and Paul Reed. And if Bamba's needed, the shooting is the big thing. And I think you're talking about rotations. You got a lot of guys that can make shots in Oubre, and if Tobias gets it going, and Maxey and Kyle and Cameron Payne and Buddy Hield, that's how the Sixers are going to win. You get the 14, 15 threes in a playoff game with Embiid clicking at 30 points a game. That's a pretty good formula.
All right. It's going to be fun. Last thing, Tom, how often have you rung the bell before a Sixers game? And is that as much fun as it looks?
Well, it's great recognition. Typically I'm, shall we say, Chet, plugging a hole.
Okay.
You know what I mean? The one time I did it, this is so ironic, and it was dumb luck sort of, but it was something like, it was like, not that you keep track, but I went back and it turned out it was the 1776th broadcast that I'd ever done. Like, how ironic is that, for the 76ers? But it's a neat tradition that the Sixers have done pregame. And it's obviously nice to be recognized by the fans and whatever, and thought of to be able to do that. So it's fun to see who gets to do it on a nightly basis. It created a nice tradition and a good send-off for how the Sixers introduced the ball club prior to the game.
And by the way, congratulations on last year receiving the Bill Campbell Broadcast Excellence Award, or whatever they call it at the Sports Writers Association. Well deserved, Tom.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Chet.